Because it's in the news and because people don't seem to know what it means, let's talk about the definition of the word genocide. Hi, my name is Matt Hirschberger. I write about facing a bleak world with hope, curiosity, and imagination. For the purposes of this video, it's also important to tell you that I have a master's degree in human rights. So genocide as an act is nothing particularly new. Genocides have been happening basically for as long as we've had agricultural civilization. But the actual word genocide to denote the crime didn't exist until towards the end of World War II. The word genocide was coined by a man named Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish man of Jewish descent who, when he was studying law as a young man, was alarmed to find out that when the Ottoman Empire mass murdered Armenians, there was no legal term with which they could be tried under international law. After Hitler invaded Poland, Lemkin fled to the United States where he sought asylum, and he spent the entire rest of the war trying to raise international awareness of Nazi atrocities, especially against Jewish people in Europe. Towards the end of the war, he coined the word genocide to define what the Nazis were doing to Jews in Europe. And the word genocide means the intentional destruction of a people in whole or in part. Now, at the end of the war, there were no laws against genocide on the international stage. And so Lemkin went to go work for the United States legal team that helped to execute the Nuremberg tribunals against Nazi war criminals. And he was frustrated at the end of that because he believed that the full extent of their crimes wasn't able to be tried because there was no sort of law that he could try them under. Now, it was at this time that the rest of the world was waking up to the full extent of the horrors of the Holocaust in Nazi-occupied Europe. And so Lemkin was actually very quickly able to successfully push through the Genocide Convention in the newly formed United Nations. It passed in 1948 and it went into effect in 1951. And the vast majority of the world's countries, 152 of them, have signed and ratified the Genocide Convention. There are some of them that have refused to sign. Most of those are in Africa or Southeast Asia. And then there are also countries which have signed, but they have signed on reservation that grants them immunity from prosecution for genocide without the consent of their government. Unfortunately, the United States is one of those countries. So the Genocide Convention lists as genocide one of 5 acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And these are the 5 acts. Number 1, killing members of the group. Number 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Number 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Number 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And number 5, forcibly transferring children to the group to another group. Under the convention, 5 crimes can be punished. 1 is genocide. 2 is conspiracy to commit genocide. 3 is direct and public incitement to commit genocide. 4 is attempt to commit genocide. And 5 is complicity in genocide. Now, it's worth noting that Lemkin and other activists who were pushing for the Genocide Convention also considered other forms of crimes to be lumped in with genocide that did not make it to the final convention. The first of these is political killings, which was refused by the Soviet Union because at that time they were under Stalin and he was doing political killings all of the time. Now, the second thing that didn't make it into the convention was cultural genocide. Lemkin had pushed for this, but acts of destroying a people's culture as an attempt to erase them from the earth would have been included in a larger definition of what counted as genocide. But this was taken out of the final convention because many of the signatories were colonial powers, and they still held on to colonies, and technically everything that they were doing at the time would have counted as cultural genocide. Now, the United States government's Political Instability Task Force estimates that there have been 43 genocides in the years between 1956 and 2016. They estimate in that time 50 million people have been killed in acts of genocide, and the United Nations adds that probably 50 million people have been displaced because of genocide as well. Now, while the Genocide Convention has been in place for over 70 years, they have had a very hard time successfully prosecuting anyone or any state for the crime of genocide. And the reason for this is that it requires the cooperation of the governments that are being charged. One of the very first accusations of genocide under the Genocide Convention was made by the Civil Rights Congress in the United States, where they accused the United States government of committing acts of genocide against Black Americans. Under pressure from the United States government, the United Nations did not even acknowledge that it received the petition. The great sad paradox of the concept of genocide is that it is very easy to define. It is an act committed with an intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a a group of people. But unfortunately, it's virtually impossible to prosecute because of the politics involved in the prosecution of crimes that were committed by governments. If you're interested in this topic, I did a previous video on genocidal ideology and what makes an ideology into a genocidal one. I will try to do more on human rights topics as they come up in the news, which they unfortunately always do.